I'll never forget the morning I drove out to my quiet lake cabin lot, expecting to hear nothing but the wind through the pines and the soft lapping of water against the shore. Instead, I found an oversized RV parked smack in the middle of my property, as if someone had decided my land was their personal campsite. When I knocked on the door, a woman with a sharp glare and an attitude to match snapped, "This spot is free and I'm not moving." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with any squatter. I was dealing with an HOA Karen, and she had no idea who she was up against. Let us know where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I woke up early that morning, the kind of crisp, cool dawn that reminds a man why he loves life out by the lake. The air was sharp with the scent of pine, and the silence was broken only by the faint call of a lawn drifting over the water. I'd owned my cabin lot for years, a simple, rugged piece of land with a small dock, a fire pit, and enough room to breathe. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, bought with hard-earned money and countless hours of labor. That patch of earth was where I went to escape the world, to fish, chop wood, and just sit on the porch, watching the sun fade behind the trees. That morning, I brewed myself a cup of black coffee, threw my tool belt in the back of my pickup, and set off with plans to patch the dock. The old boards had taken a beating over winter, and I'd been meaning to fix them before the summer crowd arrived. The dirt road was quiet, just the way I liked it. The rising sun cut through the trees, scattering golden light across the hood of my truck. But the moment I turned onto the narrow path that led to my property, I slammed the brakes so hard my coffee spilled across the seat. There, right in the middle of my lot, sat a massive white RV. Not parked politely off to the side, not even remotely temporary, it was angled like someone had claimed the whole property. Lawn chairs and a folding table were set up by the fire pit. A portable grill stood smoking with fresh food, and a closed line sagged between two pine trees, with laundry flapping in the breeze. For a moment, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe this wasn't my lot, but as I looked around, I saw my dock, my old wooden sign, and the metal gate I'd installed myself. No, this was my land, and some stranger was squatting on it like it belonged to them. I parked my truck on the road, grabbed my hat, and strode toward the RV. My boots crunched over the gravel, and I knocked firmly on the metal door. It swung open a few seconds later, and I came face to face with a woman who looked like she'd walked straight out of a suburban HOA nightmare. She was in her late 40s with bleached blonde hair tied back into a messy bun, wearing oversized sunglasses even though we were in the shade. She clutched a plastic cup of iced coffee as if it were her badge of authority, her lips curled into a half smirk. "Yes," she said, tilting her head, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Morning," I began, keeping my tone measured. "This is private property. I think you may have parked here by mistake. I own this lot, and I need you to move your RV." Her smirk grew wider. "Oh, I'm not moving." I stared at her, waiting for a laugh or some sign that she was joking. None came. "I'm sorry." "What, you heard me?" she replied with a casual shrug. "This spot is open for community use. The HOA says we're allowed to park on any empty lot around here. If you have a problem, take it up with them." I took a slow breath, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. "I don't care what the HOA told you. This land is not common property. It's mine, paid for, titled, and surveyed. You're trespassing." She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorway. "Oh, so you're one of those types. Think you can hoard the best view of the lake and not share it with anyone? Not how it works around here, cowboy. Maybe I should call the cops and let them decide." Her attitude made my blood boil. "Ma'am, I'm asking you nicely. Pack up your RV and leave before we have a real problem." She let out a mocking laugh. "Not happening. My husband and I are staying here for the weekend. Hoy has my back." You, on the other hand, sound like someone who's about to get into legal trouble for harassing me." And with that, she slammed the RV door in my face. I stood there for a long moment staring at that door, my pulse pounding like a drum. This wasn't just some confused tourist. This was a full-blown Karen, one of those people who believed rules only applied to everyone else. I walked back to my truck, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I could have called the sheriff right then and there, but I wanted to know why this HOA was meddling in what was clearly my property. I dealt with enough of their nonsense before, but this crossed the line. As I sat in my cab, I watched her strut around my land like she owned it, dragging their lawn chair closer to my dock just to make point. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, the leather creaking under my grip. That was when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide. If this woman thought she could park her RV on my land and hide behind some flimsy HOA excuse, she was in for a rude awakening. But first, I needed answers, real legal answers, and I was going to get them. I didn't waste any time that morning after watching her parade around my property like she owned it. I threw my truck into gear and drove straight to the nearby HOA office. The sun was barely over the treetops, but I was already boiling with frustration. I wasn't about to let some entitled stranger trample over my rights, especially on the land I'd poured my sweat and savings into. The HOA office was in a small building near the entrance of the lakeside community with a big sign that read, "Lakeview Estates HOA. The lady at the front desk, a woman in her 60s with sharp glasses and an overly sweet smile, looked up as I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, planting my palms on the counter. "I need to know why there's an RV parked on my private lot and why someone told them they have a right to be there." She raised her eyebrows like I just accused her of stealing silverware. "Sir, if you're referring to the temporary use policy, it applies to unclaimed spaces."
"This isn't an unclaimed space," I cut in, my voice rising despite myself.
"Lot 47 down by the water. That's mine, paid in full. I've got the deed to prove it." Her smile wavered, but she tried to keep her composure. "Well, I'm not sure what arrangement was made, but you'll need to speak with the board if you had the dispute." "Trust me, I'll speak with them," I said, turning on my heel. "And if they don't fix this, the sheriff will." By the time I got back to my lot, the woman, Karen, as I'd started calling her in my head, was sitting in a lawn chair sipping her iced coffee like nothing was wrong. Her RV door was propped open, and I could hear music playing faintly from inside. I parked my truck at the edge of the lot, got out, and walked straight toward her. "Ma'am," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I've just come from the HOA office. You're trespassing and you need to move your RV now." She glanced at me over her sunglasses, her smirk returning like a bad habit. "Oh, so you went crying to the HOA. That's cute. I told you they said I can stay here. I'm not moving just because you got your feelings hurt." My patience was wearing thin. "Let me make this clear. This is private property. You don't have permission to be here, and the HOA doesn't have the authority to give you permission. I'm asking you one last time. Pack up and leave." She set her coffee down and stood up slowly, squaring her shoulders. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I've lived in this community for 10 years. I've chaired HOA meetings. I know the rules better than you ever will, and as far as I'm concerned, this lot is empty and fair game. You want me gone? Call the cops. See how far you get." Her arrogance was unbelievable. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "You're right," I said after a moment, my voice cold. "Maybe I will call the sheriff, and when I do, they'll be the ones towing that RV off my property." She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made my blood boil. "Oh, I'd love to see that. Go ahead. AD, cowboy. Let's see how tough you really are when the law shows up." I stepped back, took out my phone, and pretended to dial. That wiped the grin off her face for just a second, but she quickly crossed her arms and stood her ground. I stopped short of actually calling, though. I wanted to be smart about this, to handle it in a way that left no room for argument. You know what I said, slipping the phone back in my pocket? You've got until sundown to move that RV. After that, I'm calling a tow truck, and believe me, you don't want to see what happens when they haul your rig out of here. Her eyes narrowed behind those sunglasses. You wouldn't dare. Try me, I said, turning and walking back to my truck. As I drove away, I could feel her gaze burning into my back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew she'd fight me every step of the way, and I wasn't about to let her win. That evening, I called a buddy of mine who worked at the county sheriff's office. I explained the situation and he confirmed what I already knew. She had no legal right to be there. Trespassing on private property was a serious matter, and if she refused to move, I had every right to have the RV towed. The next day, I'd make my move. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had even broken over the horizon. Sleep hadn't come easy that night. I kept thinking about Karen's smug grin, the way she'd thrown the HOA's name around like a weapon. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was determined. If she thought the HOA was her shield, I was going to tear that shield down piece by piece. I brewed my coffee, tossed my boots on, and headed straight for the HOA office again. This time, I wasn't interested in conversations. I wanted answers, and I wanted them fast. When I walked through that office door, the same woman from the day before looked up from her desk. She straightened her glasses and said, "Oh, it's you again. Did you manage to sort things out?" "No," I replied sharply, "and I'm done playing nice. I want to see the board president now." Her eyebrows shot up, but she picked up the phone and called someone in the back office. A few minutes later, a man in his late 50s walked out. He wore a cheap polo shirt tucked into khaki pants and had that kind of polished fake smile I've come to associate with people who love their little bit of authority. "Good morning," he said, extending a hand I didn't bother to shake. "I'm Alan, president of the Lakeview Estates HOA. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," I said, stepping closer, "is that one of your residents is parked on my private property and refuses to leave. She claims you gave her permission." Alan tilted his head and clasped his hands together. "Well, technically our community guidelines allow residents to make use of open lots for temporary recreational purposes." I cut him off, my voice low but firm. "Open lots, not owned lots. Mine isn't open. I have the title and deed to prove it. Your HOA doesn't own 1 inch of my land. So, unless you want to explain why you're enabling trespassing, you'd better get that RV out of there." His smile wavered. "Now let's not get heated. I'm sure this can be resolved. The HOA's goal is to maintain harmony. Don't give me that line," I snapped. "Your idea of harmony is letting some entitled woman squat on my property. I'm done talking. Either you tell her to move, or I'll handle this through the sheriff's office, and I guarantee you won't like the paperwork that follows." Alan's jaw tightened slightly, but he still tried to keep that fake, calm tone. "Perhaps we should review the documents and see what will save you the trouble," I said, pulling a folded copy of my land survey from my back pocket. "Here's the survey, here's the deed. Both say my name, not yours. So, explain to me why your HOA is meddling in my affairs." For a moment, he had no answer. He cleared his throat and said, "I'll speak with her. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." When I got back to my lot, Karen was out by the dock, sunbathing like she was at a luxury resort. Her RV was still there, her grill was smoking, and her smugness was at full power. I parked my truck and got out, walking toward her with a look that must have told her I wasn't in the mood for games. "Morning, cowboy," she said, adjusting her sunglasses. "Here to whine some more." I ignored the jab. "The HOA president is on his way. He's going to explain to you that you're trespassing and you're going to move your RV before I have it towed." She laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, Alan. He's a sweetheart. He won't side with you. He knows I have a right to be here. You're about to find out just how wrong you are. I said 20 minutes later, Alan's SUV pulled up. He stepped out, smoothing his polo shirt like he was preparing for a debate. "Karen," he called out, trying his best to sound friendly. "Could we have a quick chat?" She hopped up. All smiles now. Alan, perfect timing. This guy's been harassing me, saying I'm trespassing on his property. Can you believe that Alan shot me a quick glance, then cleared his throat? "Karen, I've reviewed the situation and well, it seems this lot does belong to him." Her smile vanished. "What? No, that's not possible. The HOA said." Alan raised his hands. "The HOA doesn't have authority over privately owned lots. Karen, if he owns it, we can't allow you to stay here without his permission." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. You're kidding me." "I'm afraid not," Alan said gently. "You need to move your RV today." Karen turned to me, her face flushed with anger. "You set this up. You think you're so clever." I folded my arms. "No, ma'am. I just know my rights now. Are you moving it, or do I make the call?" She glared at me like she wanted to burn a hole through my chest, but she didn't answer. As Alan left, he muttered something about keeping the peace, but I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. She stormed back into her RV, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. I stood there for a moment, staring at that RV, knowing she was stewing inside, probably plotting her next move. That's when I realized something. If I didn't take the next step, she'd find another excuse to stay. I pulled out my phone and dialed a tow truck. I knew dealing with Karen wasn't just about telling her to leave. It was about shutting down every excuse she might try to throw my way. People like her thrive on bluffing and intimidation, but once you put the law in front of them, their bravado tends to collapse. The moment I got home that evening, I spread every property document I owned across my kitchen table. There it was, my deed, my property tax records, and the survey map clearly marking my lot. I'd even found the letter from the county clerk I'd received when I bought the land years ago. Every line of ink told the same story. This land was mine, not the HOA's. But I didn't stop there. I called up my lawyer, an old friend named Mark, who had handled my property purchase. Mark was a straight shooter, the kind of guy who didn't like wasting time on nonsense. "Sounds like you've got a classic trespassing case," Mark said after I explained the situation. "The HOA has no authority over your land. If she doesn't leave voluntarily, we can serve her with a written notice. And after that, it's just a matter of calling law enforcement." "That's what I figured," I said. "But I want to make sure she can't twist the rules. She keeps throwing the HOA in my face like there's some kind of government agency." Mark chuckled. "The HOA's power only extends to properties that are actually part of their association. You said you bought the lot before the HOA was formed." "Exactly. It's an old lot that's been grandfathered in. I've never signed a single paper with them. Then they don't have a leg to stand on. If you want, I can draft a letter tonight that spells it out. Legal and clear. You hand that to her. And if she still refuses to leave, we'll call the sheriff together." "Do it," I said without hesitation. The next day, I returned to the lake, armed with a folder of documents and a determination that could cut through steel. As I pulled up, I saw Karen sitting on her RV steps, sipping another oversized iced coffee like she was waiting for me. "Well, well," she said with a grin that was equal parts smug and daring. "Back to bother me again. Let me guess, you've got more fake paperwork to show off." I stepped out, F the truck, and walked straight up to her, holding the folder under my arm. "No fake paperwork here. This is the deed to the land you're sitting on. And this," I tapped the front page, "is a legal notice drafted by my attorney. You've got 24 hours to move your RV before law enforcement steps in." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she crossed her arms, doubling down on the attitude. "Oh, please. Lawyers, sheriffs, do you really think I'm scared? Haas says I can be here." I handed her a copy of the property survey, pointing to the boundaries clearly marked in black ink. "Read this. Karen, see that line? That's the edge of my property. And here's the kicker. You're not just trespassing. You're parked in a way that blocks the fire lane, which means when I call the sheriff, they'll have plenty of reasons to tow your rig on the spot. Her face flushed red, but I could see the uncertainty creeping in. She stood up, towering over me on the RV steps. You're bluffing. Try me, I said calmly. You've got until tomorrow. If your RV is still here by sunset, it's getting hauled out by a tow truck and you'll be paying every dime of the fine. I turned and walked back to my truck, but I wasn't done. I needed to make sure there wasn't a single crack in my case, so I drove straight to the county courthouse and spoke with the property clerk. Your name's on the deed, sir. The clerk confirmed after looking up my records. HOA has no authority over you or your property. If they've told anyone otherwise, they're overstepping their bounds. Would you be willing to write that in an official statement, I asked. She smiled. Absolutely. I'll have it printed for you in a few minutes. With that official Timant in hand, I felt a new surge of confidence. Karen could scream, threaten, or call the HOA all she wanted. But the law was on my side. I even called the sheriff's office to give them a heads up. Sounds like you've done your homework, the deputy on the line said. If she's still there after your notice, give us a call and we'll send someone out. That evening I returned to my property one more time. Karen's RV was still there, but she wasn't lounging in a chair this time. She stood by the grill with her arms crossed, watching me like a hawk as I got out of my truck. Didn't I tell you? I said, holding up the courthouse document for her to see. This is an official statement from the county. You have no claim here. Last warning, move the RV. She didn't answer, just glared at me with a look that could curdle milk. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. I got back in my truck, knowing full well she wouldn't move willingly. And that was fine by me because tomorrow I'd be bringing the tow truck and I'd make sure she learned that I wasn't bluffing. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I'd already made up my mind. Karen's RV was leaving my property, whether she liked it or not. I wasn't the type to pick fights, but I wasn't about to let someone like her push me around. I'd spent years paying for that land, maintaining it, and protecting it from trespassers. I wasn't going to let a woman with a bad attitude and an oversized coffee cup claim it as her personal vacation spot. The first call I made that morning was to my buddy Hank. He ran one of the best tow services in the county, the kind of guy who could haul a bus out of a swamp if you gave him enough rope, PE, and a strong enough winch. Hank had been hearing bits of my story since yesterday, and when I told him the RV was still there, he chuckled. Sounds like you've got yourself one of those HOA queens, he said. Don't worry, I'll bring the big rig. She won't have a choice once I'm done. I appreciate it, I told him. Let's make sure we do it by the book. The sheriff's on standby if things get heated. I drove out to the property ahead of Hank to take one last look at the situation. As soon as I pulled up, Karen came storming out of the RV like she'd been waiting for me. Her face was red and her sunglasses were perched on top of her head now. So you're really doing this? She shouted, stomping toward me. You think you can just have me thrown off this lot like I'm some kind of criminal, ma'am? I said calmly, stepping out of my truck. You've been given every chance to move your RV on your own. I gave you warnings, I brought proof, and I even involved the HOA president. You've left me no choice. You're going to regret this, she hissed. My husband knows people. The HOA will. The HOA has no say here. I cut in firmly. And your husband can talk to me after this RV is gone. Until then, you'd better step aside. She glared at me, crossing her arms so tightly it looked like she might crack her own ribs. You wouldn't dare. That was when Hank's tow truck rounded the bend, the sound of its heavy engine rolling down the dirt road like thunder. Karen's mouth fell open slightly as the massive flatbed truck pulled up behind her RV. Hank hopped out, wiping his hands on his coveralls and giving me a nod. Morning, he said. This the one. This is it, I replied. She's been warned. Karen's jaw tightened. You can't touch my RV. This is illegal. I'll sue you and your little towing company. Hank just raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, the sheriff's department signed off on this. I've got paperwork to tow this vehicle for trespassing. You don't have a leg to stand on. Before Hank even hooked up the winch, Karen ran back inside the RV. I could hear drawers slamming and muffled shouting, probably calling her husband or maybe just having a meltdown. I gave her a few minutes before I knocked on the door. "Karen," I said, my tone firm but calm. "This is happening. You can either move the RV yourself or Hank will tow it, and you'll pay for every penny of it, plus the fine." "What's it going to be?" The door cracked open just enough for her to glare at me. "You're going to regret this," she muttered, her voice trembling with anger. "I'll make sure you regret it. Move it yourself or we'll do it for you," I repeated. When she didn't answer, Hank just shrugged and got to work. He backed the truck up, lowered the ramp, and started securing chains to the RV's frame. Karen burst out the door, waving her arms like she was trying to stop a moving train. "You can't do this," she screamed. "This is harassment. This is trespassing," Hank said calmly as he tightened the winch. "You're lucky we're not hauling you along with it." As the RV was pulled onto the flatbed, Karen stood there furious and speechless. She looked at me like she wanted to curse me into the ground, but all I did was fold my arms and watch. "This is what happens when you don't listen," I told her. "Next time, don't park on someone else's property without asking." She huffed, grabbed a duffel bag from the RV, and stomped down the driveway toward the road, muttering under her breath. Hank secured the RV, gave me a grin, and said, "Well, that's that." But I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen didn't just walk away. And sure enough, as Hank drove off with her RV, I saw her pacing near the edge of the property, phone pressed to her ear, likely calling every HOA member in half the county to complain. Fine by me, she could call whoever she wanted. The law was on my side, and I was just getting started. By the time the sun set that evening, I thought I'd seen the last of Karen's antics. Hank had hauled her RV out like a stubborn bull, and I figured she'd lick her wounds and stay gone. But I underestimated how far someone like her would go to feel like she had the upper hand. The next morning, I returned to my lot to check on things and maybe do a little work on the dock. What I found instead was a circus. Karen was back this time without her RV, but with a small group of HOA board members and a man I assumed was her husband, a tall, skinny guy with an equally sour face. They were standing near the fire pit, talking loudly as if they owned the place. When I pulled up, Karen spun around and pointed at me like I was the villain in her story. "There he is. That's the guy who had my RV stolen." "Stolen?" I said, stepping out of my truck. "Lady, your RV was towed because it was trespassing on my land. You're lucky I didn't have you arrested." Her husband stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "You think you can just push people around? We pay HOA fees to keep this community nice, and you're out here acting like a dictator." I gave him a hard stare. "I don't pay HOA fees because I don't belong to your HOA. This land is mine, not yours, not the board's, and certainly not hers. I have every legal right to protect it." Alan, the HOA president, looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. "Now, everyone, let's stay calm. We're just trying to find a peaceful solution." "Peaceful," Karen barked. "This man humiliated me. He had my RV dragged away like I'm some kind of criminal. I want it brought back and I want him fined." I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You trespassed on my property, ignored my warnings, and now you want me fined. You've got some nerve." As the shouting escalated, a sheriff's cruiser rolled down the dirt road. I'd called them earlier, anticipating this very stunt. Deputy Miller stepped out, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with the kind of calm presence that quieted a room. "What's going on here?" he asked, surveying the group. Karen wasted no time. "Officer, this man had my RV stolen and now he's threatening us." Miller glanced at me and I handed him the documents I'd brought: deed survey and the official notice from the county. "She parked her RV on my private property without permission. I gave her 24 hours to move it, and when she didn't, I had it towed. Everything's legal." Miller scanned the papers and nodded. "He's in the right, ma'am. You were trespassing. The tow was lawful." Karen's face turned beet red. "This is outrageous. Don't you know who I am? I'm on the HOA board that doesn't give you the right to take over someone's land, Miller said firmly. If you don't step off this property right now, I'll have no choice but to issue a trespassing citation. For a moment, Karen looked like she might explode. Her husband muttered something about unfair treatment, but I barely heard him over the pounding of my own heart. This was the showdown. I'd been waiting for a public reckoning of who was right and who was wrong. Let me be crystal clear, I said, stepping forward. This land is mine. I don't answer to your HOA, your rules, or your attitude. If you or anyone else sets foot here again without permission, I'll have the sheriff handle it every single time. Are we clear? Karen glared at me, her hands trembling with fury, but she said nothing, not a word. Good, I added. Now I suggest you go find where Hank parked your RV because you're not welcome here anymore. The HOA board members shuffled uncomfortably. Alan mumbled something about misunderstandings and moving forward, but I could see he was just trying to save face. Karen shot me one last hateful look before storming off toward her husband's truck. Deputy Miller gave me a nod. You did the right thing. People like that. Sometimes they need a hard line drawn. Appreciate you coming out, I said. No problem, he replied. Call me if they try this again. As the dust settled, I stood on my dock, watching the sunlight ripple across the lake. For the first time in days, I felt the tension in my chest start to ease. Karen had been put in her place, and the HOA had seen firsthand that I wasn't going to roll over for anyone. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about an RV anymore. It was about standing my ground literally, and making sure people like Karen learned there were consequences for trying to bully their way through life. And this showdown, it was only the beginning because I wasn't done yet. After the showdown with Karen and the HOA board, I knew I couldn't just let things slide. People like her don't learn unless there's real accountability. If I left this unchecked, I'd be dealing with another stunt within weeks, maybe worse next time. That same afternoon, I called my lawyer, Mark, and laid out everything that had happened. From the moment I found the RV on my lot to the moment the sheriff confirmed I was in the right, Mark listened without interrupting, his voice calm and steady. Sounds like you've got enough evidence to take this further, he said. We can file for damages, including the towing costs, and request an official restraining order to keep both her and the HOA from touching your property again. I'll also send them a cease and desist letter to make things crystal clear. That's exactly what I want. I replied, I don't just want this to end. I want them to think twice before pulling anything like this on anyone else. Over the next few days, Mark drafted a legal notice and sent copies to both Karen and the HOA board. It spelled out in no uncertain terms that any further interference with my property would result in immediate legal action. He also included an invoice for the towing fee, something I had no intention of paying myself. A week later, I received a call from Alan, the HOA president. His voice was tight, like he was trying to sound reasonable, but couldn't quite swallow his pride. Look, he said, Karen's. Well, she's not exactly happy with how things went down. She's talking about suing. I laughed. She's welcome to try. I've got the law on my side. Alan, and you know it. There was a pause. We don't want this to escalate, he said carefully. The board has reviewed the documents, and it seems we may have overstepped. We'll cover the towing fee and issue a statement to clarify that your property isn't part of our community lot policy. Good. I said that's a start, but I still want a written apology from your board for enabling this nonsense. And Karen, she'd better keep her distance, or the next time I won't settle for just a tow truck. Alan sighed. I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, I received a formal letter on HOA letterhead signed by Alan and 2 other board members. They admitted their mistake, apologized for the misunderstanding, and confirmed that my lot was entirely outside their jurisdiction. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put the matter to rest legally. Karen, however, wasn't so easily silenced. A neighbor of mine, Jake, stopped by one evening with a grin. You won't believe what I just heard, he said. Karen's been telling anyone who listened that you bullied her and that the HOA caved because you're some big-shot lawyer or something. I chuckled. Let her talk. As long as she stays off my property, she can say whatever she wants. But I wasn't entirely done with her. Mark suggested filing a small claims case for damages related to the trespassing and harassment, mostly as a way to send a message. I agreed. When the court date rolled around, Karen showed up with that same arrogant posture, sunglasses perched on her head. Even inside the courtroom, she didn't have a lawyer, just a stack of papers she clearly didn't understand. The judge listened patiently as she tried to argue that the HOA had given her permission. Mark calmly laid out the deed, the survey, the sheriff's report, and the towing documents. Within 10 minutes, the judge ruled in my favor. Karen was ordered to pay the towing fee, plus a small fine for trespassing. The look on her face was priceless, pure shock mixed with indignation. "This isn't fair," she blurted. But the judge had already moved on to the next case. As we walked out of the courthouse, Mark patted me on the back. "That's how you handle people like her. Legally, firmly, and with no room for argument." "Thanks, Mark," I said. "I couldn't have done this without you." That evening I stood on my dock, the cool breeze off the lake carrying the smell of pine and water for the first time in weeks. I felt real peace. Karen was legally bound to stay away. The HOA had been put in its place, and I knew I'd done more than just protect my land. I'd set a precedent. No one would mess with me or my cabin lot again. The morning after the court ruling, I drove back to the lake with a sense of finality I hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bracing myself for a fight. The road to the cabin was quiet, the early sunlight filtering through the pines and casting golden streaks across the dirt. It was the kind of peaceful drive I'd been missing since Karen barged into my life. When I pulled onto my lot, it was exactly the way I wanted it. Empty, still in mine. No RV, no folding chairs cluttering the view, no smug face waiting to greet me with another argument. Just the sound of the water lapping gently against the dock, and a pair of ducks floating lazily near the shore. I got out of my truck and stood there for a while, taking it all in. There's something about winning a fight for what's right that feels better than any victory you can buy. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about standing up for myself, for what I worked for, and for the principle that bullies don't get to win just because they're loud. Later that day, I walked around the property, checking every corner, every post, and every line of the fence. I tightened the gate latch, swept off the dock, and stacked a fresh pile of firewood near the fire pit. It felt good to put my hands back to work on something productive, rather than fighting someone else's ignorance. Jake, my neighbor, stopped by in the afternoon. He leaned against his old pickup with a grin, watching me repair a loose dockboard. "Looks like things are quiet again," he said. "They'd better stay that way," I replied, wiping sweat from my brow. Jake chuckled. "Karen's been real quiet since court. Heard she's not too happy about having to pay up." "Good," I said with a shrug. "Maybe she learned something." "Doubt it," Jake said, laughing. "But she sure won't mess with you anymore. Word's gotten around. You're not someone to cross." That night, I lit a small fire in the pit and sat on the old wooden chair I'd built years ago. The stars were coming out one by one, their reflections glimmering on the lake like scattered diamonds. I poured myself a cup of coffee the way I always do when I need to think. I thought about everything that had happened. The trespassing, the shouting matches, the tow truck, and the courtroom showdown. It would have been easy to back down, to let her and the HOA walk all over me just to avoid the stress. But deep down, I knew I'd never forgive myself if I had. Sometimes you've got to stand your ground, even when it means getting your hands dirty. A few days later, I received a final check in the mail from Karen for the towing cost and the court fine. I laughed out loud when I saw it, not because of the money, but because it felt like the perfect punctuation mark on the whole ordeal. I didn't cash it right away. I left it on my counter for a couple of days just to remind myself that no matter how much someone tries to push you around, the truth in the law has a way of leveling things out. With the drama behind me, I spent the weekend doing what I'd planned weeks ago, fixing the dock, fishing off the shore, and just enjoying the quiet. There's a certain peace that only comes from knowing your land is truly yours, free from interference and nonsense. As the sun set over the lake, I leaned back against the old railing, the wood warm from the day's heat. I could hear the wind whispering through the pines, the water gently kissing the shore. It was exactly how I'd pictured it when I first bought this place, an escape from the chaos of the world. Looking back on it all, I realized something important. The fight with Karen wasn't just about property lines or HOA rules. It was about respect. People like her think they can bulldoze through life, taking whatever they want because no one stops them. Well, I stopped her, and I'd do it again if I had to. This whole experience reminded me that sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's worth it. If you've ever dealt with someone trying to push you around, whether it's a neighbor, an HOA, or anyone else, don't be afraid to stand your ground. Justice has a way of finding those who fight for it. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of real-life standoffs and hard-earned victories, consider subscribing to the channel. You never know. The next story might just inspire you to take a stand of your own